Hi, and welcome to Quarantine Cocktails with Chad and Nicole.
Today we're going to be talking about the Sazerac. So the Sazerac is a spirit-driven cocktail similar to the old-fashioned. In fact, the Sazerac is often credited as the original cocktail, although that is inaccurate from what we've read, as the term cocktail was first used in a modern context in 1806, as we mentioned in our earlier episode on the old-fashioned.
Right, and in that usage, it's just a combination of some base spirit, some sugar, some bitters, and a splash of water. So
the story of the Sazerac is truly a story of New Orleans, Louisiana. We start with Antoine Peychaud, who arrived in New Orleans as a child. And he set up shop as an apothecary in 1834, where he sold his American aromatic bitter cordial, which now we know as his Peychaud's bitters. He also served drinks mixing his bitters with brandy and other spirits as well. So sometime around 1850, a man by the name of Sewell Taylor sold his bar and started importing cognac from Sazerac du Forges et Fils, a French producer from Limoges, France. So this man's former bar, then called the Merchants Exchange Coffee House, created the cocktail using this cognac. And it also used Peychaud's bitters and gave the cocktail the name Sazerac, which quickly became the bar's main specialty.
So in 1869 or 1870, Thomas Handy, who had been the bar's bookkeeper up to that point and who clearly had an eye for business, took over operation of the bar, renamed it to the Sazerac Coffee House, and he also incorporated a company called the Sazerac Company at that time. And then in 1873, a few years later, Antoine Peychaud unfortunately fell on hard times, and he sold his pharmacy and the recipe for his bitters, the formula for his bitters, to Thomas Handy.
But just as Handy had acquired the bar and the bitters recipe for the bar's signature drink, cognac became quite difficult to obtain due to a devastating phylloxera aphid infestation in France's vineyards in the late 1860s to 70s. So his solution was to shift away from cognac and move to the more readily available American spirit rye whiskey. Originally retaining a dash of the cognac, this eventually phased out. So in parallel, the absinthe wash sprung up as an innovation to the cocktail around 1870 and became incorporated into the standard recipe.
Yeah, and the first published version of the Sazerac is found in Cocktail Bill Boothby's 1908 book, "The World's Drinks and How to Mix Them," and it's basically in the modern format in that printing, including the use of the absinthe wash. And Cocktail Bill is rumored to have been given the recipe by Handy prior to Handy's death in 1889.
So shifting gears, we'll talk about absinthe for a minute. Absinthe originated in the 1790s and quickly gained popularity around the 1800s. It is a very high-proof spirit with anise, fennel, and other botanicals, including leaves and flowers of grand wormwood, which is said to have psychoactive effects. So traditionally, it has a very bright green color, that I'm sure we've all seen, although there are colorless versions of absinthe as well. So in the 1900s, absinthe began to get banned in many countries as it was blamed by conservative groups for a number of societal ills, having become associated with bohemian culture due to its popularity with Parisian artists and writers and that sort of thing.
So in 1912, absinthe was banned in the US after being banned in other countries as well. And that forced yet another change to the Sazerac cocktail. By this point, the Sazerac company had expanded and was producing and marketing the Sazerac cocktail in bottled form, and sometime in the 1890s after Handy had passed on. So in order to deal with this, the lack of availability of absinthe, they began producing an anise-based liqueur called Herbsaint. Now, Herbsaint is intended to replace the absinthe, and in fact, the word Herbsaint is kind of it's a near anagram of absinthe. So Herbsaint became the de facto means of making Sazerac cocktails for quite a long time. And it remains kind of the default in New Orleans bars to this day. Most still make it with Herbsaint. So you can certainly find it made with Herbsaint in many places. And that continued even though now true absinthe containing the grand wormwood was re-legalized in the US as of 2007. It's also worth noting that those humble beginnings of the Sazerac company back in 1860 or 1870, I guess it was, that company has grown to become the second largest spirits company in the U.S. And it sells about 300 different brands of liquors and has an annual revenue of around $1 billion. So from those humble beginnings, it's really grown.
Yeah, so with all this history, it's funny that today we have a cocktail named Sazerac that lent its name to a bar, a liquor company, a brand of whiskey, and the cocktail got its name from a cognac, even though its most canonical recipe doesn't even contain cognac anymore. Somehow this tale of evolution in the face of adversity feels to us very much like the history of New Orleans itself. And in 2008, the Louisiana State Legislature indeed named the Sazerac the official cocktail of New Orleans. So just to show you what the classic Sazerac recipe is, you can see here it's got rye, the Sazerac brand preferred 1:1 simple syrup, Peychaud's bitters, a dash of Angostura, and then the absinthe for the wash of the glass.
Yeah. But for the demoed version today, we're actually going to kind of incorporate some of the old characteristic of the Sazerac by including a split of rye and cognac rather than just going with straight rye. We also kind of increase the level of the bitters in the drink because of the smoothness of the cognac. So to keep the sort of balance of the bitter and the smooth cognac flavor. So here is the recipe that we'll be presenting today, which we've called the Vieux Sazerac, in a nod to the old form of the Sazerac, and also maybe it harkens to another New Orleans cocktail, the Vieux Carré, which also includes a mix of whiskey and cognac. You'll see here that we've also selected a specific absinthe, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Now, you'll also notice that we're recommending the use of simple syrup. So the original recipe actually did call for using a sugar cube and muddling the sugar cube, and certainly purists will still enjoy that form of it. I think as much for the ritual of it than the actual result in the cocktail. But from my perspective and many other people that we've read about, using simple syrup probably just results in a more consistent cocktail experience, and so we recommend using the simple syrup. Overall, the preparation of the Sazerac inspires a lot of strong opinion about how to do it correctly. Much of it sort of anchored in tradition, and so in that way, it's similar to, say, the Martini or the Negroni, which also seem to, inspire this level of kind of polarization, obsession, et cetera. But so the traditional preparation of the Sazerac calls for using 2 rocks glasses, one to mix in and one to chill and prepare the wash. Certainly that's a fine way to go. Today we'll just be using a separate mixing glass, in part because we are making 2 at once, and so just to have enough room to make the cocktail. But I think you can either do it in a shaker, in a mixing glass, or in the more traditional way with the two rocks glasses themselves. So I want to talk a little bit about the absinthe wash, especially for your home use. Absinthe is not something that most people love, and so buying a big bottle of absinthe, like I've had a bottle of absinthe, frankly, that's sat around for ages and ages, and so what I did find was that there are actually some small format absinthe bottles at 50 milliliters. They're available pretty readily. I picked one up at my local Total Wine. So I picked these 2 up.
So they're pretty perfect to use just if you are going to just do a wash.
Right, exactly. Because, they're 50 milliliters each. For a wash, you really only need about 2.5 milliliters or even less. So a 50 milliliter bottle will make you 20 Sazeracs, which seems pretty good for instead of having a big bottle, unless you really like absinthe or want to get into absinthe, and then feel free to get a big, nice bottle of absinthe. For today, I've chosen to use this Oregon Spirits absinthe. I tasted it. I found it to be very strong on the anise and very strong on the menthol. Quite a lot of sort of peppery spiciness. It's almost too astringent for just drinking straight, but I think for the wash, it will turn out really nicely because the nose of it will hold up really, really well, which is a big part of what the absinthe does, is provide this kind of herbaceous anise nose as you get into the cocktail.
And that's something you can certainly play around with too.
So the other thing that I wanted to touch on is a little bit about the correct level of dilution. As if you've attended or viewed some of our other videos, that dilution is really important, and figuring out how to get the right dilution can be challenging, especially for home use where you tend to be using freezer ice right out of the freezer, also referred to as double frozen ice in the biz. And so when you're taking it right out of the freezer, it's usually a lot drier. It's cold. It's very cold, colder than the ice that they normally have sitting at about 0 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. So the standard freezer is much lower, and so the ice will be cold, but it's also very dry. And so you can get chilling very quickly, but not a lot of dilution. And so the way we've tended to address that with most drinks that we've done here is to either stir for quite a bit longer or to shake for quite a bit longer for a shake and drink. But here we're following the recommendation that Difford's Guide makes with the Sazerac to build the Sazerac with a little bit of water added as you're stirring if you're using that freezer ice. And so I wouldn't necessarily add the water if you're using wet ice, but for taking it out of the freezer, go ahead and add this 1/2 ounce of water per drink, and that will give it the right level of dilution, allow the flavors to really come out and open up. And then
with regards to garnishing the cocktail, there is an agreement that lemon oil is always extracted, but there's a division around whether the lemon peel is discarded or dropped actually within the drink itself. We have played around with it and prefer to have it simply sit on the side of the glass, more for aesthetics, but to provide just a hint of that citrus aroma without really competing too much with the absinthe and the other characteristics of aromas that you're going to be getting.
Yeah. So, I think the last thing before we start making the drink is just say this is a drink that it's quite small, right? You might think, oh, it's kind of more of a shooter, but this is not a shooter drink. This is a drink to nose, right? To take the aroma in and then to sip enjoy, let the flavor kind of unfold, because it's got a lot of layers in the flavoring, especially I think with the mix of the cognac and the rye. So, all right, so we'll start making the drink.
Okay.
And the procedure here is to sort of follow some of the original sort of procedure, which is we also aren't chilling our glasses. Normally we recommend chilling the glasses, but in some cases you don't want to chill it. I think we're gonna chill these just with ice while we're building the drink. That gives a certain level of chilling, but it doesn't make it too cold, which allows still for the absinthe wash to have the right level of expression in the drink.
Ice in?
Yeah, can pull the ice out and throw those in our glasses.
Okay.
And then we'll set those aside.
I'll do that while
Great.
you...
So we'll set those aside. In our mixing glass here, I will start putting together so I'm using the Sazerac rye. I think it's 6-year aged, something along those lines. Anyway, standard Sazerac rye. Some people rave about the 18-year Sazerac rye if you want to go really upscale. You could go and try that out. I'm tempted to after having read about it because the Sazerac, being a largely spirit-driven drink, actually could warrant using a high quality spirit ingredient, and so that would definitely be worth exploring. So I'm going to put in, it's about 2.5 ounces of that because I'm making 2. And then I've selected this Grand Domaine VSOP cognac. It's not super high end itself, but it's pretty good and quite enjoyable in this cocktail. If I can get it open.
The cork? Not a spoon. There you go.
Yep, just needed a little.
Little muscle.
Yep. All right, so again, 2.5 ounces of that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now we've got our rye, we've got our cognac. Those are our split spirit base. Mm-hmm. We're going to go with our
simple syrup.
Simple syrup, 1/2 ounce, so full ounce here.
If you're making 2.
Yeah, so quite a bit of simple.
Mm-hmm.
And some of
Show
that
the
is,
recipe again.
yeah, some of that is the water, adding a bit of dilution as well. And in fact, per our discussion of dilution, I'm going to throw in 1 ounce of water here, again, for the 2 cocktails. And then we're going to get our Peychaud's bitters, our dating back to the 1834.
So 3 dashes, so you're gonna do 6 because you're making 2.
Correct, and that's 2 dashes works out to 1/4 teaspoon. So I've got a 1/4 teaspoon measure. So I will fill up 3 of these 1/4 teaspoons of the Peychaud's. And again, we're going heavier on the Peychaud's and the Angostura bitters in part because of the smoothness of the cognac. That was a little light, so don't want to go too light on the bitters. But I like to measure the bitters because it gives you just a more consistent feel. Like just spraying and dashing, you don't actually know how much is going in, and it changes over time as your bottle becomes emptier. So clean that off a little bit. So 2 dashes of Angostura. So Angostura has been added from the original recipe, but most people really think that it does add something significant to the cocktail. So we'll consider it part of the classic recipe, even though it's not part of the original recipe. All right.
Good distinction.
Yeah. Okay, so now we've got our ice out of the freezer. We're chilling our glasses over here. We're going to put our ice in to stir. This is not very wet ice because it's right out of the freezer. we've already diluted. So we don't really have to stir that long. I'll probably throw a little bit more ice in.
Okay.
It's pretty significant in order to really get it chilling quickly. So we're going to just stir that and chill.
And while you're mixing, do you want me to do the absinthe?
Well,
You want to show it?
I kind of want to show it, and also, like, if you're making it yourself, you're not really going to have two hands to do it.
That's true.
But, you know, maybe what you can do is start measuring out the absinthe. So I'm now going to just dump the ice and any water that's come out. So there'll be a little bit of moisture in there, and then we will, one of those in each cup.
Okay.
Yep. So we'll just really roll that around and try to get it a good wash around the inside of your.
A good coating.
Yep. Good coating of the absinthe. Don't want to take too long though, because
you can see it. It's thick enough that you can see where it's.
And then.
And you dump it out.
Dump out what's left, and I couldn't find my Hawthorne strainer, so we'll see how this works. But there is our Sazerac. We might have gotten maybe a little more dilution than desirable this time around. Yep. Bar rag, but you can see, you know, works out to about 4 ounces once you finish up with it.
And then we'll express.
And then we'll take our lemon peel and express that over the top. Just kind of really get some nice orange oil expression. You can even run the lemon around there. And then we actually cut some little aesthetically pleasing lemon. And there you go. There is your Vieux Sazerac with cognac and rye. Let's have a sip of that. Very good. Get the nose. It should really unfold with a lot of complexity in your mouth too, and I like it. I'm getting even some of the pepperiness and anise sort of coming through into the back of my throat as I take it down. So should really enjoy this over time. Don't go at it like you really want to down it in 1 minute. So
you don't want to move too quickly.
It is delicious. Yeah, I really like the smoothness of the cognac. I think it really adds something to the drink. So there is our Sazerac cocktail. Hope you enjoy that. And as they say in New Orleans, laissez les bon temps rouler. Cheers. Cheers, love.
Cheers.
Cheers to all of you.